I stood in that driveway holding the one notice I was certain would finally make her leave. I had no idea that morning that I was about to lose everything I had spent 8 years building. My name is Margaret Holden, and for 8 years I was the one who decided what this neighborhood was allowed to look like. The neighborhood looked, from the street, like exactly the kind of place worth protecting. 96 houses, matching fences, lawns trimmed into uniform stripes. I watched the moving truck pull up to 14 Crestfield Drive from my own front porch, coffee in hand, already taking notes. The husband introduced himself at the mailbox the first week. Polite, forgettable. I barely looked at him twice. It was the wife I noticed. Claire. Quiet, unhurried, never once explaining herself to anyone who hadn't asked. She didn't wave back the second week. I told myself it didn't matter. I have told myself a great many things didn't matter. I hosted coffee on my own porch most Saturday mornings, and I noted the way I noted everything, exactly who never came. I kept a small wooden corkboard at the entrance to Meadowbrook Heights, and for 8 years it was never once empty of an orange notice. I had a clipboard I carried the way other women carry a purse, and I believed completely that I was the only thing holding this place together. I had done this before, 3 times, quietly, patiently, with paperwork instead of raised voices, and every time it had worked. I never once asked myself what kind of woman stays calm through every single notice I send. I should have asked that much sooner. I cited the Petersons' basketball hoop 3 separate times for aesthetic noncompliance before their daughter ever learned to dribble properly. When the father fought a grass height fine with actual photographs and actual measurements, I filed a lien against his house within the month. He held on for 14 months before he sold $11,000 below market, loading a truck while I watched from my own driveway like I was checking something off a list. I called the police on the Wind family twice in 6 weeks. Suspicious activity, unauthorized gathering, over 2 elderly parents staying for a medical emergency. They left after the second call. I told myself the neighborhood was simply healthier without the disruption. I filed a lien against an older couple on a fixed income after they tried to add a wheelchair ramp without my approval first. They couldn't afford an attorney. They sold to a property company for a price nobody was happy about, and I sent them a goodbye letter on official HOA letterhead. I have never, until very recently, called any of that cruelty. I called it maintaining standards. I called it doing the job nobody else wanted. I taped the first violation notice to their front door before they had even finished unpacking their boxes. The vehicle was a state-issued SUV parked on their own driveway. I called it an unauthorized commercial vehicle and considered the matter closed. The husband called the county zoning office, then wrote me back, polite, precise, citing the exact covenant section I had misquoted. I read his letter once, set it aside, and decided his politeness was the actual problem. For days later I sent a second notice, failure to respond appropriately to HOA communication, for the crime of having been right the first time. I had run this board unopposed for 6 of my 8 years. The 2 times someone challenged me, I made the cost of running higher than the cost of withdrawing. 6 weeks after they moved in, I walked up their front path with Dale beside me and Ryan a half step behind. I rang the bell twice, then knocked anyway, the way you knock when you've already decided what the answer will be. I told the husband there was an inquiry into the woman occupying his property, as though she were a leak in the ceiling rather than his wife. He pulled up the county deed on his phone. Both their names, current, confirmed, and held the screen toward me. I looked at it for exactly 1 second and looked away. That's a county record, I said. That's not HOA verification. I handed him a yellow fine for unauthorized occupancy, a category of violation I had, if I am honest now, invented on the spot. Before I left, I told him I had removed people from this community before, good people who simply weren't a fit. I told him I didn't enjoy it. I have wondered since whether that was ever true. Ryan glanced back at me on the walk to the car. There was something in his face I chose not to read too closely. I sent 2 board members to photograph their work vehicle one morning, phones raised low like they were collecting evidence at a crime scene. I never imagined anyone would notice 2 men standing at the end of a private driveway with their phones out. I was wrong about that. 9 weeks in, I filed a formal lien against their property, $2,800 in violations, 8 line items. Only 3 of those line items had ever actually existed. I built the other 5 the way I built everything that worked for me. Fully formed, on paper, no history required. A lien doesn't need to be true to work. It only needs to sit on a title long enough to make staying cost more than leaving. 4 days after the lien letter, I picked up my phone and called 911 myself. I never imagined, dialing that number, that someone would ever pull the recording and play my own voice back to me in a room full of people deciding my future. She was watering her garden at 7 in the morning, gloves on, back to the street, and I told the dispatcher she was refusing to identify herself. No one had asked her to identify herself. 2 officers arrived, found a homeowner watering plants, and wrote up exactly what you'd expect. I watched the entire exchange from the far end of the block and told myself, even then, that I had simply been being careful. I called an emergency board meeting and prepared for it the way I prepared for everything I considered a serious matter. Printed slides, a laser pointer, 11 minutes of phrasing. Dale had done this with me long enough to stop feeling anything about it. Gerald had sat through 2 of our hearings and never once asked a question. There was a woman at the end of the table whose name, I realize now, I never bothered to learn in 8 years of sitting beside her. I told the room there had been repeated police involvement at their address, as if it had simply occurred on its own and not from 2 calls I had personally dialed. I never once looked at her during those 11 minutes. I have wondered since whether that was caution or cowardice. The vote passed 4-1. Ryan voted no, quietly, looking at the table instead of at me. I told myself his vote was a small, forgivable irregularity. I was very good, by then, at forgiving myself things. I signed the removal notice in slow, careful cursive, the way I always signed things I wanted to look permanent. I slid the copy across the table toward him. He took it and read it standing there in front of everyone. He handed it to her. She folded it once along the crease and put it in her jacket pocket without reading a single word. Something moved through me in that moment that I didn't have a name for yet. I told myself it was nothing. 3 days after the meeting, I picked up my phone one more time. I told the dispatcher there was an unauthorized woman at the address, refusing to vacate under a formal removal order. The dispatcher asked if there was any physical threat. I said I thought she believed she lived there. I drove to the end of my own street and parked, the orange notice already printed, already folded, already certain in my hand. She was kneeling in the garden bed when I arrived, pulling dandelions, gloves green at the wrist. I held the notice out toward her like a passport I expected stamped, and told her she did not belong here, the way I had said it to 3 families before her. The cruiser turned the corner. I felt, for one last clean second, the calm of a woman certain the story was about to end the way it always had. The younger officer stepped out, hand moving toward his notepad out of habit, walking toward us with the unbothered pace of a man expecting a noise complaint. I turned to him before his feet finished crossing the pavement. "Officer, thank you for responding. That woman right there does not belong here," I said. "I have a signed removal order, a formal complaint, documented noncompliance." I told him I needed her removed from the property immediately. I had said versions of this sentence 3 times now. It had always worked. He kept walking. Then he stopped, not slowed, stopped, his hand falling away from the notepad. His eyes moved past me and landed on her. He didn't look away again. The soil on her wrist had dried to a thin, pale line, and for half a second that was the only thing I could look at. She stood up out of the garden bed slowly, gloves still on, and looked back at him. 3 seconds. I did not understand yet, standing there, why they mattered so much. "Colonel Calloway." He said it quietly, the way you say a name you've heard in 100 briefing rooms. Not a question. A fact already settled, long before he ever stepped out of that car. I blinked. The notice in my hand dropped an inch, then another inch. I felt my own mouth open around a sentence I had already lost the shape of. "Ma'am," he said, "this is my commanding officer." 5 words. His partner's terminal cast a small blue light across the driveway, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that it already looked like evidence. "Both homeowners appear on the county property record," he said, without looking up at me twice. "This is HOA managed property," I said. That board order supersedes. I do not fully remember choosing those words. I only remember believing them right up until I didn't. She spoke then, for the first time, looking only at the officer. Please document this call in full. Please note this is the third contact in 9 weeks from the same individual regarding this address. Please note that Miss Holden just claimed, on a recorded line, that a private residence falls under HOA jurisdiction. The officer kept writing. I kept not speaking, which for me felt like its own kind of verdict. He finished writing and looked up at me with the patience of a man who has seen this exact shape of situation before. Filing a false police report is a misdemeanor in this state, he said. Repeated false calls against the same address can constitute criminal harassment under state statute. Do you want to formalize a complaint today? He let the question sit for exactly one breath. I looked at the notice still in my hand, then at her, then at the terminal still glowing with both their names on it. The color left my face the way it leaves a room when someone turns off the lights. Not dramatic, just gone. No, I said quietly, to the ground. 8 years of certainty folded itself into 2 words. I have replayed his face in that exact second more times than I will ever admit to anyone, including myself. Ted was already on his porch, hands in his pockets, watching the way you watch weather finally breaking. Sarah stood across the street with her phone held low at her side. Not raised, just present. I counted, without meaning to, the doors and windows with someone standing in them. 6 households. All of them watching me hold a piece of paper that, in that moment, meant absolutely nothing. He handed the officer a folder I hadn't even seen him carrying. Call logs, the removal notice, the fabricated fine, my own signature on every page. The officer took it without comment and began reading. I turned and walked back across the street to my own driveway without looking at anyone. I did not trust my own face anymore. I went inside and closed the door. I sat alone at my own kitchen table that evening, the same kind of table I had imagined her sitting at, defeated, for 7 months. It was not her file on that table anymore. It was mine, assembled by other people in my own handwriting, in my own signature, page after page. The non-emergency misuse unit opened its review within 72 hours. I did not know that yet, sitting in my kitchen. The officers had written a phrase into their report that afternoon, pattern of non-emergency misuse. A formal notice of inquiry arrived by certified mail 3 days later. I held it the way you hold something you already know the weight of. I allowed myself 1 moment to feel what that envelope meant. Then I told myself I would simply manage this too. Linda Marsh. I learned her name the way you learn the name of weather that has already passed through your house. My own attorney's firm sent a letter 5 days after the driveway. Continued representation presents an irreconcilable conflict of interest. They were withdrawing, effective immediately. I read that sentence 3 times before it actually landed. I drove 40 minutes to the law firm myself once, before they dropped me, just to sit in the parking lot and not go in. The lien was vacated the following week. The board, without my vote, voted unanimously to withdraw the filing. The same board that had voted 4-1 against her 11 days earlier was now 4-0 against me. Her attorney filed for recovery of legal fees under a bad faith enforcement clause I had personally helped draft years earlier. I had written that clause to threaten anyone who challenged me with the cost of their own defense. I never imagined it pointed back at me. Total exposure, $4,400, with more still pending. I read the number twice and did not say anything out loud. 6 days after the driveway, Ryan chaired an emergency meeting. I was not in the room. 14 homeowners had submitted written statements before it even began. He read the number aloud at the start. Ted stood without being asked and read 2 pages of careful, lined handwriting. 4 years of what he had watched from across the street. Sarah's hands were shaking when she handed her statement over. Then she sat through the entire meeting anyway. 3 of those 14 statements named police calls made against them or their families. All 3 went to the misuse inquiry that same evening. The vote to remove me from the presidency was 4-0. Ryan read the tally without ceremony and moved to the next item on the agenda. I have had to imagine most of that room from what people were willing to tell me afterward, which by then was very little. I think now about the Petersons and the Wynns, who never knew that meeting happened, who sold quietly and left years before anyone assembled their paper trail into anything that mattered. I think about the corkboard at the entrance to this neighborhood, the one I filled with orange notices for 8 straight years, never once empty. The week after I was removed, someone cleared it down to bare cork. One index card went up in its place, handwritten in plain blue ink, the date of the next meeting open to everyone. No violation schedule, no fine language, no warning in the corner about consequences. Just a date. I drove past it slowly, the way you drive past a thing you used to own and no longer recognize. I stood in front of that bare cork for longer than I should have, the way you stand in front of an empty space that used to hold the entire shape of your week. I have not hosted a Saturday coffee morning since. No one has asked me to start again. Ted still nods at me sometimes when our paths cross at the mailbox. It is not unkind. It is simply final. Ryan is the one who calls the board meetings now. He does it without a laser pointer, without slides, without a single raised voice. I think the neighborhood is quieter now in a way I used to mistake for emptiness and now understand was simply peace. I still live on this street. I see them some mornings now, coffee on the porch, the garden bed finally finished. I was the one who decided 8 years ago that this place needed someone like me standing guard at its edges. I am the only one, in the end, who ever needed watching. I told myself for 8 years that I was protecting something. I am still not entirely sure I am ready to call it what it actually was. I think about the 3 seconds that officer stood frozen in my driveway, and I understand now that it was never really 3 seconds. It was 8 years arriving all at once, the way debt always arrives, quietly, and then completely. I think about the orange notice I held out toward him with 2 fingers, certain it was a weapon. It became, simply, a piece of paper, right there in my hand. That was all it had ever been. The garden bed by her front walk is full now. Not weeds, flowers, the kind that come back every single year whether anyone tends them or not. Some mornings I watch a boy ride his bicycle in slow loops past her gate, and I wonder what it's like to live somewhere that no longer waits for something to go wrong. I still drive past that house some mornings. I still slow down. I have never once stopped again. I built a file on everyone in this neighborhood for 8 straight years. In the end, the only file anyone needed was the one I had been writing about myself the whole time, one notice at a time. That was the price I told you about at the beginning. I paid it in full. I finally understood, standing in that driveway, that the paper in my hand had never been the weapon at all. I had been